Welcome to the Weights and Plates podcast. I am Robert Santana. I am your host, along with Trent Jones, my co-host.
What's going on, Bo?
Not much, man. It's Friday.
It's Friday. Yeah, and I understand you are headed out of town, right?
I am.
Going over the pond, over the Great Blue Divide.
Yeah, yes, I'm going over the pond for the first time in my life. I'm going to Berlin.
Yeah, well, that'd be cool, man. That's when I was in college, I got to study abroad a little bit. I spent 6 months in Europe, more or less. I did 5 months maybe. And that was one of the places I went, was Berlin. It was pretty cool. I wish I'd gone to more places in Germany at the time, but I will say that that's the cool thing about Europe. It's really easy to get pretty much anywhere.
That's what everybody keeps telling me. So I think I'm going to have to go to more places So I have this thing, I think some of our listeners might be just getting neurotic hearing this from me. When I travel, I don't really plan anything, and I try to put it off to the last possible minute. And this international trip is no different. Like, I have never thing packed. I don't know where I'm going when I'm there. I just have flight info, and I know when I'm leaving, and I know where I'm staying. But, I generally have an idea of what I want to do. There's a few places that I want to go, and few countries I want to check out because I've been told what you've been told, that you can bounce around easy. But I'm flying by the seat of my pants on my first international trip in the 39 and a half years of my life.
Well, the time I was in Europe was 15 years ago now, so it was a while ago. But I have to say the memories the strongest memories I have, the best memories I have from that time was when I did exactly what you're doing. And I didn't really make any plans. We're just like, hey, let's go to Florence and do what? I don't know. Just hang out. It was awesome. It was great. The tour, like when I signed up for like tours and stuff, I'm not a very toury person, but I do like history. So like when we visited Rome, I had to go and like look at the Forum and everything. And I was a big Latin nerd at the time. But, I don't know. Looking back, I didn't really get nearly as much from the like guided tours and things than I did from just like hanging out and just, taking in the vibe of the city. So cool, man. Well, I hope you enjoy that.
I hope so too, because
in honor of that, we're going to do a shorty today. We're going to do a shorty.
Okay.
Because we both have pretty packed schedules here, but I think this topic really is kind of well suited to a short episode. And it also fits in with the last two episodes we did on programming. Today we're going to talk about why did you miss? Or why did I miss? You might be asking yourself that question. So it would be cool if we all could run linear progression forever. And we'd all be squatting 1,000 pounds for 3 sets of 5.
2,000.
2,000 pounds, right? And beyond.
Yeah.
Actually, it'd be funny to run the numbers. Be like, okay, normal training age, like how far could you progress if you could just add 5 pounds forever?
Yeah.
I wonder how, I don't know. I'd have to do the math on that. But obviously, we can't do that. So you're going to run it. Every single program you run has an end date to it. The thing about it is we don't know what that end date is. It's governed by a whole bunch of variables, some of which are knowable, many of which are not. And so every program has a natural conclusion. But we run into people all the time who start to miss reps in their program, whatever they're doing, whether they're doing linear progression or they're somewhere in the advanced novice phase or the intermediate phase like we spelled out in the last 2 episodes. They're somewhere in that progression and they start to miss reps. And, we need to talk about what do you do when you start to miss reps? Because I think some people have this assumption that, I missed reps, it's time to change the program. And that's not the case.
Sometimes it is, but
sometimes it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is, but usually it's not the case. Usually there's some other culprits you need to address first. So we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah, let's be careful with that one because sometimes it is time to change the program and you get these guys, and you know who you are, I know you're listening, who want to be on linear progression forever because it's not even about achieving a 1RM. Like, let's say it's not even about squatting 500 or 600 or 700. It becomes about adding 5 pounds every time. Right. And getting that 3 sets of 5 as high as possible 3 times a week and only 3 times a week because if I do a light day, I must be some sort of failure,
Oh my gosh. That's true.
Like there's this mentality that becoming an intermediate is like this terrible fucking thing and you need to be a novice forever. And then it's like, dude, you've been doing this, and I'm not thinking we're going to be specific here. I'm exaggerating now, but there's a guy that I'm working with right now, and I keep telling him these exact things, so I think he's listening. But you take a dude, just your metaphorical dude, and that's doing this, and you look back, and it's like, okay, you've added weight to the bar once every 6 months because you keep recycling LP and trying to change some minute variable to squeeze out another 5 pounds. And you squeeze out that other 5 pounds, maybe 10, and then you bonk, have to reset, get hurt, something happens, and then the next time you add 5 pounds is, guess what? Several months later. So you're progressing slower than an intermediate now, objectively speaking.
Yeah.
But if I change this one thing, if I change this one thing, maybe I can add another 70 pounds to my LP and stay on my 3 sets of 5 squats 3 times a week forever,
Bro, the party's over.
The party's over, man.
It's over, man. Just accept it.
Of course, if you're underweight and you decide I'm going to, become clinically obese, that's not the same as practically obese. Let's get your BMI to 35 or 40, right?
Right.
Yeah, sure, you might eke out a lot more squat weight, if you're willing to get fat enough. There are situations where you've artificially ended your novice linear progression by not doing certain things, sure. But if you put a couple 100 pounds in your squat and deadlift, and then you're bonking, and it's like, okay, I slept 7 hours instead of 8, or 6.5 instead of 8. Dude, you've come this far. You really think that extra hour of sleep is going to put a significant amount of weight on your fucking lift?
Right. You
might put another 10 on it, but then you're going to bonk again, reset, and then guess what? You're going to wait 3 months to put another 10 on it.
Well, right. Well, and that's we talked about that in the programming episode too. Or at least I remember I specifically pointed that out. One of the big philosophies I have with programming is momentum. I believe it is better to progress slowly, or I should say more slowly, and not get stuck than it is to get stuck and then have to get unstuck.
100%.
Because getting unstuck, there's a lot of reasons why, and I went through all those, but so those people would be violating my principle of momentum. But I definitely work with them. So you guys, you know how you are. Just, hey, listen, the party's over, right? It's okay. You can do a light day. You can move on. And so, but we're talking to the normal, the more normal folks here, who, hey, you missed some reps, doesn't matter what lift it's on. And you're kind of wondering what do I do now? Is it over? Do I need to switch programs? So one of the things we do when you miss reps is we ask 3 questions. In the Starting Strength website, I think, did this come from the book? I can't remember at this point.
It's an article called The First 3 Questions.
The First 3 Questions. Okay, so that's where I remember it from. So there's 3 questions you can ask yourself of why did you miss reps? The first question is, how long were you resting? And I have to catch myself. I just kind of assume this point. I'm at this point, I just kind of assume that people are resting long enough. But I tell you what, I have clients who they really should know better, and they still will be like, well, I rested 3 or 4 minutes when I quiz them on it. I'm like, well, there you go, man. You're doing heavy squats for sets across. I mean, bro, come on. So that's the first thing is, how long did you rest between your sets? When you are first starting linear progression, this can be confusing, by the way, if you're brand new. So when you first start linear progression, the first few workouts you do are going to be fairly easy, because you're still learning technique. We're trying to build that mastery of the basic movements before we really start stacking on the weight. So it's going to be relatively easy. You probably don't need to rest 5 to 7 minutes between sets your first few workouts. Okay, it's going to be more like 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. That's plenty. But as you go on and the weight gets heavier, the rest time needs to increase, especially on the squat. The squat is greatly helped by resting. If you're only resting 3 minutes between your squats and you're dying, if you bump that up to 5, 6 minutes, that will be a huge improvement on your squats. I cap it off at 7 minutes. I've heard some, I think even Rip at one point or another has said rest 10 minutes, 15 minutes. No, I think that's bullshit.
That's over the top.
If you can't get it in 7 minutes, you just can't get it. Okay, that's ridiculous. And plus, come on, you have a life. You should have a life. If you don't have a life, go get one.
There's a couple guys that I'm thinking of that when I first ran mine, they were resting 20 minutes or 25 minutes between sets, just so that they could keep adding 5 pounds to their squat. And then guess what happened, Trent? All the other lifts went to shit, and they were just squatting 3 sets of 5 over a 2-hour period.
Okay. All right. So I've done meets before. Thankfully, it was only one meet that I did that was like this. I don't think I would do another one like this, where I think the time between attempts was like 10 to 15 minutes. It was long. I can't remember exactly at this point, but it was over 10 minutes. And it was horrible because you're just sitting there. You're like, well, shit. Like, what do I do? Do I like go hit another warm up? Do I just sit here and get cold? Like, I don't know. Yeah, come on. 20 minutes. That's ridiculous. The point is, if you rest more time to a reasonable extent, that does improve your ability to hit the next set. When you are resting, you are replenishing spent ATP, and you are also utilizing the glycogen stores in your muscles and in your liver so that you have more energy available for the next set. And, especially when you're doing heavy squats. Squats seem to be the big culprit here. You blast through energy. And so you need time for all those processes, for those energy systems to ramp up and do their work of supplying more energy to your muscle cells.
Dude, these volume close grip bench presses, I've had to rest a long time for them lately. I'm kind of surprised.
Yeah, that's true. Bench press also seems to be like that. Now, this just could be for me, like in the fact that presses don't seem to bother me as much. Like I seem to be able to go faster on those. But, if somebody was having an issue, that's one of the things I would address first is like, if you're only resting 3 minutes on your upper body work, let's go 4 to 5 minutes. But yeah, there you go. There's the first question. Are you resting long enough? Mm-hmm. Question number 2 is, what kind of jumps are you taking? And this is, again, something I've run into with trainees of all levels of advancement. If you add too much weight too fast, you're going to run into a wall. And you oftentimes, many times, if you just took the smaller jump, you would get there slower to the same spot, but you would get there and you would keep going, right?
Yeah,
this is the momentum concept again. So, but yeah, I've recently had a client who has been coming back had to take some time off. So she's been coming back and, so she made a big chunky jump on her bench press and then missed.
Right.
And she's like, I don't know what happened. Like I got 3 sets of 5 in this last week. I'm like, oh, but you did 90 last week, right? Like, yeah. And you attempted 100 this time? Yeah. And they're like, well, first of all, that's a big jump. That's a 10% increase in weight. 90 to 100 is a lot more than 300 to 310 in percentage terms. But then also it's a 10-pound jump. If she would have made a 2.5-pound jump, she would have made it. And then another 2.5-pound jump. And a few weeks later, she'd be doing 100, and it would have been a few weeks later, but she would have gotten it instead of missing reps. And then you're like, well, what happened? Did I just take too big of a jump? Was I not recovered? What was the thing? So so taking smaller jumps just eliminates some of the guesswork of where you are in the stress recovery adaptation cycle, right? Because if you take too big of a jump, you're like, well, I don't know. Was it because of other factors or was it because of the jump? Right. Taking smaller jumps makes more sense in that regard. And this also, I think, just kind of with younger trainees that don't have as much experience, I think the desire to make big chunky jumps is it's a misunderstanding of what training is, right? Like when the process of training, as we spelled out with the stress recovery adaptation cycle, is this accumulation of progressively heavier weights. And it's the accumulation over time to move you from weak to strong. And you have to have some sort of control mechanism in there to ensure that the stress recovery adaptation cycle will happen the way it's supposed to, right? So you need to have a measurable amount of stress that you're applying every workout in order to know that part of the equation is balanced, right?
Yeah.
And so when you make these big chunky jumps, you're just like, your stress equation is just jumping all over the place. You don't really know like how much you're putting the finger on the scale in terms of giving yourself stress to produce the adaptation of strength.
Now let's talk about that, because big chunky jumps have their place. And there's one area that comes to mind where people don't make jumps big enough, and that's when novices are deadlifting.
Okay. Yep.
They will prematurely try to reduce the jumps to 5 pounds and reduce the frequency to every other workout or once a week, to the point where the squat surpasses the deadlift or is close to it, right?
Right.
And it's because, I've said this many times, the deadlift's hard. It's stuck to the floor. If you can't get it moving, you're just not strong. And it's also
feels terrible.
That first inch of the deadlift is a good proxy for recovery too, because if you're blowing your load on squat, as I like to call it, and you basically are under eating or under rested, but you have just enough energy to get your squats in, it's going to show up when you go to deadlift. The bar's not going to move because your quads are going to be fried, right?
Yes.
And people don't understand that, right? So the thing is, when you first get exposed to a difficult deadlift, notice I'm not using the word heavy, a difficult deadlift, you start to think, oh my God, this is heavy. This is all I got, Right. And then if you film it and watch it, it looks like a warm up, right? But you don't know that because you're not used to getting things off the floor that are difficult, that are starting to get hard, right? And people will just assume that, okay, I can't add 10 pounds next week, and they'll add 5. And then when they could have added 10, and they could have added 10 the next workout, the next workout, the next workout. So remember, the deadlift's a shorter range of motion. You're still using a lot of muscle mass, and you can make pretty big jumps on that for a while, Eventually, it's like the squat. The 5 pound becomes a standard, but early on, when you're a novice trainee, the deadlift can go up by 10 for quite a while.
Yeah, and I would say it's safe to say that for the first 3 to 6 weeks, for sure, you're going to see those big chunky jumps on the deadlift. Maybe beyond that for younger trainees, especially men.
It's just so funny because guys are a lot of these male trainees especially are quick to add 5 to 10 pounds to a bench for as long as they possibly can.
Of course,
and then keep repeating and recycling it and refuse to go under 5 pounds.
Right.
But then on the deadlift, they'll go to 5 pounds like on week 3.
Right.
Like, oh shit, that was heavy. It's like, come on, don't be a pussy.
Exactly. So this definitely takes some context here. So if you're, that's absolutely true. And to some extent, you need to, in order to produce a good deadlift, you need some weight on the bar. Your first workout, you might do it fairly light because you're still trying to, learn the movement. But pretty quickly, once you learn the basics of setting your back, you need to get some weight on the bar.
Yeah. So you don't need to take 5 to 10 pound jumps in the bench press beyond the second or third week. Yeah, it's pretty standard. And if you're a female, you're going to be adding a pound at a time. So get used to it.
That's right. Yeah, and that's the other thing too is if you don't have a pair already or a set, I should say, get some micro plates. Order them early, and you can get micro plates very cheaply now. It used to be a little harder. They used to be a little harder to get, but I believe it's
fast.
And I believe it's Rep Fitness. I'm pretty sure it's Rep Fitness. They have a set of microplates now that are like $26, and it's the complete set. It's like, you get your 1 1/4 pounds, so that in total, one on each side makes a 2.5 pound jump. You get your 3/4 pounds, 1.5 pounds, all that stuff. It's got all the essentials there. It's super cheap now.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're really nice. I've been pointing people to them. I'll drop a link. I'll go chase it down and drop a link in the show notes. But get yourself a set of microplates. They're not optional because once you need them, you're going to need them like immediately. And if you have to wait 2 weeks for them to ship, then, you're just going to be twiddling your thumbs, like getting stuck for 2 weeks on your upper body lifts. Women, absolutely 1 pound jumps on the press and sometimes even the bench press works really well when you get to that point. So don't be afraid.
All my female trainees are doing 1 pound on both of them.
Yes. Yeah. Many times I have helped women go from 60 pounds on the press to 70. That seems to be a big,
that's a consistently hard.
Getting to 70 pounds is a hard one for a lot of women. 1 pound at a time, 60, 61, 62, etc. So there you go. Jumps. Question number 3. How much did you eat? And good Lord, this is the one that I run into over and over and over and over again. If you didn't eat any food, your lifts are probably going to suck. And if you're underweight, your lifts are probably going to suck. So you have to fuel your training with food. And this is one where if you don't eat enough acutely, if you didn't eat enough the night before or the day of, just depending on when you're training, you're not going to get through training. It's not going to happen. And this becomes more and more true the further you go with your training, right?
Yep.
You know, if you got heavy squats on the menu, you can't get away with lazy, inconsistent eating habits anymore. You have to eat like it's a second job.
Yeah, and if you're a hard gainer, you're going to eat, you're going to get full, you're going to eat some more. That's just how it is.
That's right.
And if you're a skinny fat guy, you're going to see the fat come on initially, and then the muscle mass will spread it out over time because that's just how it goes. You're going to outpace the muscle mass initially, right? And then as you get stronger and the weight on the bar goes up, you're going to fill out and become more muscular, less fat. Now, if you're the big fat guy, you don't have these problems, but you still need to not go on keto because that's what the big fat guy tends to do. He thinks that he needs to eat 1,500 calories and 20 carbs a day.
Right.
No,
Yes.
Stop doing that stupid shit. You still need to eat a good amount of carbs and a good amount of protein.
And consistently. It has
Every
to be
day.
consistently the same every day. Yeah.
That means
Yeah,
Saturday and Sunday.
I see this on both ends of the spectrum, right? Yeah. So if you're very overweight, you still have to eat consistently because what I'll find is that they'll have days where they didn't eat anything, and then their blood sugar's in the tank, their blood pressure's low, their mood is real shitty. They have they have no mental gas to get through a workout. Yeah, it's going to suck, right? And then you just further tank your mood because your workout sucks. So you need to establish good, consistent eating patterns by eating the same every day. And that includes on rest days and on workout days. On the other side of the equation, for the skinny guys, I'll find that they just crush food one day and the next day they don't eat anything. And it's this kind of binge pattern, where they like to have these huge meals and then nothing for the next two meals and then kind of a moderate meal for the third one after that. And they eat another huge meal and they're like, oh, I eat so much and I never gain. No, you don't eat that much consistently. And the same goes with your training, right? Those people often have a lifestyle that has some sort of stressful job that keeps them away from easy access to food. I get it. It's hard. Sometimes you aren't going to be in the best position to get optimal nutrition, but you got to do the best you can. And that means getting food in, like thinking about it like a job. You can't just be casual about it. You can't just think like, oh, I'll just try to eat a little more. No, you have to actually make a plan for it and then stick to that plan. I know for me, I don't track my food anymore, or very rarely. Maybe once a year I'll log a few days just to kind of get a ballpark of where I am. But I don't log my food anymore. But I absolutely had to. My first year of training, I didn't do it the entire year, but I had several phases where I had to log my food because I didn't know. I had to teach myself how to eat enough to gain. Remember, I was a little 155-pound, scrawny guy when I first started training. And so to push past that, I couldn't just sit around and be like, well, I'll eat till I'm full and I'll eat a little more on top of that. That's not good enough. It's not going to cut it because your habits up to this point have made you underweight. So you have to change those habits with different ones. And so I found for me, tracking my food was huge because I did not have a consistent mental idea of what I was eating every day. I thought I was eating a lot more than I actually was in most cases.
No, you have to eat. Regardless of which situation you're in, you still need to eat a decent amount of protein, a decent amount of carbs, right? Whether you're very overweight, skinny, fat, or skinny, you have to do it. And there's no way around it. So we hammer that here all the time. It's half of the podcast is diet, although we haven't been doing that many episodes lately. We'll try to work on that though.
It's always there, right?
It's always there. I always tell people, these carb phobes, I'm like, okay, if you ramp up your carbs, you're going to feel it in like 2 to 4 days. It's almost like getting on a freaking drug or something. The effects are pronounced if you go from low carb to high carb and you're lifting weights. You feel it immediately, especially in the squat, because now you have more fluid in your body and whatnot. And it helps, to a certain extent, you got to decouple from this mentality that you have to look a certain way, and that's, it's a psychological problem. We're not psychologists, but if you're focused so much on the aesthetic, especially early on, you're just going to limit yourself because you're going to undereat, you're going to undertrain, and you're not going to get anywhere, The physical changes come with time, so you just got to kind of forget about it. And you also got to really understand that they are tied to the amount of weight you're lifting. Contrary to popular belief, that is true. It's the most objective metric that you could use to know that if you're building muscle. If the weight on the bar is going up, you're probably going to grow those muscles. That's just what happens. And this was very obvious and clear for a long time. And then we started getting these fucking idiots. Sitting here telling you that some science fiction comic book masquerading as science,
Right.
If you want to call it that, a lot of these peer-reviewed journals don't have enough information in them to say what is going to work for everybody. These are very narrow circumstances with a very narrow subset of the population, sampled in such a way that you can't generalize any of it. And this is something we're going to dive into, but peer-reviewed journals are becoming like fucking comic books. They really are. It's like and that's really in the discussion section. Like when you kind of go into the background and the methods, it's like, okay, this stuff sounds good in theory, but then when you get to their interpretations and their conclusions, it's like, guys, you're stretching the shit out of this to get published.
Right.
And I think a lot of our audience probably isn't familiar with how they do that. That's why we have some episodes coming on this, but it's just made people think about working out and a lot of other things in a very impractical way, that doesn't tend to check out in practice. What were you going to say?
It does. Yeah, it doesn't pass the smell test. That's for sure.
No.
Well, the other thing too is that you mentioned carbs, and right now in this phase of how the pendulum is swinging in the fitness world is carbs are bad, carbs are evil. Right now. Now, I don't know if in 5-10 years if they will be evil anymore. Probably not. Probably change to something else. But the other thing to remind yourself of is you are training now. So a low carb diet might work well for some guy who's just sitting on the couch and walks, 5,000 steps a day and doesn't do any training, lifts no weights, does nothing hard physically. Maybe that guy should be on a low carb diet. I don't know. But that's not you. That's not you. You have chosen to pick up the barbell and train 3 days a week. And that means your needs are different now. Your nutrition needs are different now. And part of that means eating enough carbs to make the weight go. So, if you're finally eating enough carbs after eating low carb or under eating carbs for a while, then you're going to feel a lot better. But it's something that you have to do consistently. And that means on your off days too. When you're resting on those days, you're replenishing spent muscle glycogen. And you're also, so you're filling up those glycogen stores. And along with that, you bring on extra water and fluid into the body. And that means that if you're going to work out the next morning, then you're going to be using those glycogen stores that you accumulated on the day before based on what you ate. So it's every day. It's not just the days that you work. I think some people have this idea that they need to earn what they eat. And so they eat more on workout days. Some of that has to do with their appetite. Their appetite's bigger on days that they train. But you also need to eat that way on the off days for the same reason. So there's the 3 questions. Before you start thinking about programming changes, you got to ask those 3 questions. And I would add a 4th one. I would add a 4th question to this list. And I'm sure it's been discussed in the starting strength seminars and elsewhere. But my 4th question is, what else is going on? What else is going on in life? If you have a ton of stress, if you got fired from your job, if you're going through a divorce, if your kid is sick and you stayed up late because they're throwing up, well, it's going to have an impact on your training. And for some people, it has more of an impact than others. In general, the more life responsibilities you have, the more these stressful situations are going to impact your training because, a lot of your life and your focus is elsewhere outside the gym. And so you have to give yourself some leeway and understand that if life is going nuts, then training is probably not going to go perfect. Training can be a very good outlet for stress. I know for me, it certainly is. I always feel better. I always feel less stressed when I get underneath the iron and I put in a good workout. But I also, and I'm bad about this too, right? I expect to have maximum performance even though I've only slept for 5 hours the last 3 nights, right? But I also, when I step back, I realize that, okay, you know what? This is not right now. This week is not the week that I'm going to have absolutely my best performance. I need to get in there and do something hard, do something heavy. But if I miss some reps this week, then I can't attribute that to a programming issue. I probably can attribute that to a stress issue, and it's worth repeating what I've done when I've had a chance to rest more, when I'm less stressed, so that I can, eliminate that variable. And that's what I would call the fourth question.
Yeah, so the way I like to explain this is you have like this a stress bucket, right? And there's all these things that go into it. 18-year-old kid at mom's house, the most stressful thing in his life might be training and maybe finding a girlfriend, right?
Right, yeah.
But, otherwise, the guy's going to sleep 8 to 10 hours a day. He's going to eat all mom's food. He might work part-time, and then he's just going to lift and train, right? Similar to when you're dealing with pro athletes, that's their full-time job, and everything in their lifestyle revolves around that job. What we're talking about here is, pretty much recreational lifting, or recreational training, I should say. You're trying to improve, so it is training, but it's for recreational purposes. Your life doesn't depend on it, right? Which means that bucket of stress is going to have other things in there besides the mechanical stress of training, right? Yeah, you might be married, you may have children, you may have animals, you may have a stressful and demanding job with a crazy schedule. I get people in the medical field that work shifts. They're on crazy schedules. I get people like lawyers that, have to go to court. That messes things up, And there's a variety of different examples, right? But the point is that, everything that stresses you out, you have to recover from. And it's not just a set of 5 heavy squats, and a set of 5 heavy benches and a heavy set of 5 deadlifts or whatever else you're doing, depending on your advancement, right? Now you have infants keeping you up at night. You got little puppy dogs keeping you up at night, and having to clean poop out of a dog crate in the middle of the night, or fucking change diapers in your case, Trent,
Yep.
You may have farm animals too, or you may have a job where people call you in the middle of the night, wake you up, and stress you out that way, or you're working 12 hours one day and 5 the next, the list goes on. All these stressors require you to recover from them. They compete with each other, and training usually gets the shit under the stick when you have all these other things going on, right? So you have to understand that, right? Like there's some weeks where I'm just, work stress keeps me up. I, sleep 6 hours because I can't sleep the full 8, and then, I start missing reps, right? I didn't fail though because I showed up. Remember, you only fail if you bail. The expectations are managed, and you start to, see the patterns, right, and how you feel. Feeling is subjective, of course, so you're going to know this better than anyone else. And the longer you train, the better you understand it. One benefit to having several good years of training is when you start having the bad training, you can identify these things better, and you're pretty spot on with your predictions, But
you get more stoic about it too. You're like, okay, I know things are going to be better,
Like it took me 4 tries to pin bench press 305, and a lot of that had to do with just the sleep schedule and other things.
Sure.
One week I was still sore from volume squats, things like that, right? And then this week I got set of 5 last week. This week I went for 307.5, got 4, which I was more than thrilled with because the third one was pretty fucking hard, right? Mm-hmm. But I slept 6 hours Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So then Thursday when I had to do that, got 4, and I'm like, all right, well, I'm not very well rested, so maybe next week in Europe I'll get 5,
Yeah, right.
And then I can put 3 plates on because it'll be 308, right?
Yeah, it's true, yeah,
140 kilos. But, my point is when that stuff happens, I don't care. Like 395 on the squat, I missed that 3 weeks in a row. Then I figured out that protein was the problem. So I beefed up my protein, probably my calories too, and then I got 400, then I got 395, 400, 405. Today I'm doing 410. By the way, this was recorded a week before you guys hear it, so I'm still in the States, but I'll be in Europe when you actually listen to this episode. I'll already be gone. But, so you kind of like start to figure out, you're like, okay, I'm stressed out over this, and I feel run down in my workouts, everything feels heavy, and you just kind of know, the longer you train, the better you get to know this, but it's not worth freaking out about, it's not worth writing 2,000 word novels to your coach about it, like you don't need to do that. It's,
we
it's
understand.
and we understand it's a misrep, and we understand you're going out of your fucking mind, but managing that thing that makes you write 2,000 word descriptions of a workout that consists of 3 to 4 exercises, whatever that thing is, you got to figure that out, because that's also adding stress. You writing that 2,000 word thing, several times a week is probably making it harder to train. So think about that for a second, right?
Basically, in short, psychological stress absolutely has an impact on your training. I think a lot of people want to discount it, like, but, it's not that big a deal. No, it is a big deal.
Absolutely.
It has psychological stress has a physical effect.
What is your central nervous system comprised of?
Your brain.
Your brain and your spinal cord, right?
Your spinal cord, right? Exactly.
So psychological stress starts with the brain.
That's right, exactly. And that shit is lighting up when you're doing heavy squats and deadlifts and et cetera, et cetera. So, so there you go. So that's the fourth question, and don't underestimate that one. Most of the time, I would just say that, like, stress is usually acute. There are phases of life. We do go through seasons of life sometimes where stress is just elevated for a while, and when that happens, your programming approach is going to have to change. It will have to. But most of the time, it's these acute little hits of stress that are just above our normal sort of baseline. And when that happens, if you just look at it and you kind of step back for a minute, you're like, I missed today. What happened? Well, my sleep's been shitty for the last 3 days, and this thing at work's been going on. I've had this crazy project. I'm turning it in Friday. Okay, why don't you just repeat what you did next week? Because that stressor is going away. Chances are you get it. You probably will surprise yourself. Chances are you get it. So it's okay to just repeat things when you have those acute bouts of stress. When it's something that's going to last for weeks and weeks and months and months, your programming approach is just going to have to change at that point. But a lot of times it's just these acute things, and you can work around those, but just you got to be a little flexible with it.
Absolutely.
So there you go. There's the 3 questions plus 1 on why you missed. And if you have answered all of these and you're like, nope, I've addressed every one of these reasonably well, then you start to look at your programming. And then you go back to the last 2 episodes we did and start to make some programming changes. But before you do that, don't be too quick to flip the programming lever. Make sure you have these other things nailed down first.
I want to hit on something as we close out. Trent mentioned this earlier. Momentum is more important than making progress on X, Y, or Z program, right? I never thought about this till you just said that, right? But when I'm programming somebody, my priority is to keep that momentum going, because I find that when somebody gets stuck, the psychological stress of it can really drive them to hate lifting. I've seen people quit over it. I've seen people, skip workouts over it. I mean, it gets bad, right? And on top of it, then you just have to sit there and try to reset and troubleshoot through that, Ideally, you don't want to miss. I mean, if you miss, okay, you miss, you try again, right? But, things are pretty consistent in your life. Ideally, you want to keep that momentum going versus trying to get as much as you can out of whatever templated program you're following, because you're going to go further that way. You're going to build more confidence that way, and eventually you are going to miss. There's, 2 guarantees in life? I'd say there's a third. So there's death, taxes, and missing reps,
Right, yeah.
So, just embrace that. But at the same time, when something starts to slow down, it is okay to change the program to keep that momentum going. If you're barely getting a set of 5 deadlifts on Friday after doing a set of 5 deadlifts on Monday, then maybe you just need to do it every Friday that's starting the following week. And that's okay.
Right.
That's okay. As long as you keep moving up. If you rack pulled, several, let's say you rack pulled 405 one week, then you PR'd your deadlift at 375 next week. Don't go to 380 next week on the deadlift. It's not going to move off the floor. Then you're going to get pissed, and then I'm going to have already told you that was going to happen, and then you're going to get pissed at me for being right. Or you're going to laugh at me for being right, depending on your sense of humor. Most recent guy who did something like that laughed at me for being right, because I'm like, well, it's going to be stapled to the floor, buddy. Then he literally just tried to lift it and it was stapled to the floor. So, those 4 questions are very important. but also counterbalance that out with what do you have to do to maintain momentum, not what do you have to do to stay on this program forever. The goal is not to stay on a given program forever. The goal is to make progress for as long as you possibly can, right?
Yeah. At the end of the day, who cares what program you're on? Like, we're here to get stronger. I'm not here to run a program. I'm here to get stronger.
Nobody gives a fuck if you ran starting strength and squatted 500 for 3 sets 5, you know?
Yeah.
Nobody cares about that, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know,
we just
keep
care
moving.
that you got stronger. Yeah.
Keep progressing. That's the goal here. You keep progressing, you know?
Keep progressing. Yeah.
Dial in your recovery by going down that list of those 4 questions. So do all of that. But then if all that is done, keep fucking progressing. I don't care if it's every week, every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks. You will feel better if you make a new PR versus if you try to make one weekly and you're missing it weekly. Mm-hmm. You know, for me, I'm in the 4 questions territory. I'm not sleeping well. That's why I'm missing weekly, you know. For the loads that I'm at, given all the data I've collected over the years, I can make weekly jumps. But I know that I'm getting close to a point where it's going to have to be bi-weekly. And I know that from the data. But why am I repeating the same number every week? Because I know what the fuck I'm fucking up, and it's the sleep variable before it was a protein variable. So, you know, address the 4 questions. But then after you address the 4 questions, the goal is to not stay in a program forever. The goal is to make progress steadily for as long as you can.
There you go. All right. Well, let's close it out, man.
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you for tuning into the Weights and Plates podcast. You can find me at weightsandplates.com. Or if you're in Metro Phoenix, you can come down to the gym. We're just south of Sky Harbor Airport in the South Mountain Village. You can find us on Google. We offer private training and memberships. I also have online coaching on my website. If you are interested in that and aren't near a starting strength coach or just want to work with me. And you can find most of my content on Instagram at _Robert_Santana, or you can look at the gym's Instagram page at weights_and_plates.